weather permitting.
Yeah.
So we are kind of in the hindsight, we've been looking at for the last several months, we've been looking at various existing communities in Suwannee County. So we've hit Live Oak and Branford and Dowling Park and Calvin. Now we're on to O'Brien, which is pretty much the last of that part of the series, where we talk about communities. Because pretty much after O'Brien, there's really nothing left community-wise. So today's O'Brien, then we're going to look at some other topics starting next month, which will be next year for us. So some of this we've gone over the last several months. I'm just going to try to breeze through it for y'all. Look at the Timucua territory, Native Americans, the Keefe Weeden Island culture, those things that we have talked about many, many times. So the Timucua were the ones that were here by the time the Europeans arrived. That map shows pretty much where they were in North Florida and South Georgia. And some pictures of them that we've talked about in the past. So again, I'm not going to belabor it at all, but the Timucua pretty much are extinct. They were replaced by what came to be called the Seminoles. This would be in the 1760s by this point. Now, after the 1760s, after the French-Indian War, the 7 Years' War, when the last of the Timucua had left Florida to die in Cuba a few years later, runaway tribes, basically upper, lower Yamasee, Creek, all those kind of things, upper, lower creeks, even in the slaves that had been in Georgia, the Carolinas, places like that. As they would flee, they'd flee to Florida, and pretty much they came to be called runaway Cimarron, which was anglicized to become Seminoles. So by the time the United States came to an existence, pretty much what was here in this part of the country was the Seminole Native Americans. So the Second Spanish period began in 1783 after the end of the American Revolution. The United States is created. Spain gets Florida in exchange for several Caribbean islands that Britain wanted back. The Spanish don't do much with the territory. They allow more settlers to come in. In 1818, General Jackson comes in with a small army. General Andrew Jackson comes in because at this point we've got Native Americans, the Seminoles, that are having issues. So we've got the Seminoles that are attacking the settlers. So Andrew Jackson comes with an army, and basically the first Seminole War is fought between Andrew Jackson and some of the Seminoles. But most of the Seminoles flee, so there's not really so much warfare. But they do get all the way up to the Suwannee River. So right there's a map showing part of the Suwannee River and the surrounding territories. But then Jackson goes back home, and this war, this first Seminole War, kind of spurs on Spain to finish their negotiations for the sale of Florida to the United States, because they realize if they don't sell it, then the United States can just come in and take it. And so that happens. Florida becomes U.S. territory. Adams-Onis Treaty 1819, it's finalized because they had to go back and forth between the oceans. 1821 is when the transfer actually takes place. And so after that point, when it is now United States territory, they need to establish a road, a federal road, and it's called the St. Augustine Road, or sometimes our portion anyway on the eastern half of Florida is called the Bellamy Road. So this road followed the old Spanish Royal Road, which was called the Camino Real, which in turn really kind of followed old Native American trails. So it was a very old road, if you will, or trail, if you will, and it was built using federal funding, and the portion between Tallahassee and St. Augustine was built by a guy from Tallahassee named John Bellamy. He used a lot of slave labor to build that portion of it that came between Tallahassee and whatever St. Augustine. You can see it there on that map in red. A lot of the way it kind of follows US 90, what's now US 90, until it got into Suwannee County, it went southward down through Suwannee County, or what would become Suwannee County, would pass very close to what is now O'Brien, and then it would go down into southeastern Suwannee County, cross close to Itchtuckney Springs, that area, and then go over the Santa Fe River where it is underground, the natural bridge they call it. So they went under there and then went over to St. Augustine. So that map is a pretty good representation of that old road. And I wanted to point that out to you because it went very close to O'Brien. And actually, I've got one of our old plat maps at the courthouse. Wanted to show you that. It's hard to see, but if you look very closely there on the bottom, I've got it circled in red. This map is probably from the 1880s or so. And it shows part of what is called the St. Augustine Road there on the bottom. You can see it up and down. But up here circled in the top is section 20, and that's where O'Brien is today. So it ran very close to O'Brien. We're talking about a mile. Each one of these squares, these big squares, is 1 mile by 1 mile. So pretty much a mile south of where O'Brien is today was where that road crossed in through Suwannee County. And even though it was no longer the major road at this point, it was still showing up on maps even 20, 30 years after this sometimes. So that Bellamy Road was built in the 1820s. Well, settlers continued to move into Suwannee, what is now Suwannee County, even though they didn't really live so much in the O'Brien area. But then we had the Second Seminole War begin in 1835, and that lasted until 1842. It was our longest war until Vietnam, pretty much. And during that time, the United States Army established several forts in and around Suwannee County and pretty much North Florida. By the time the war ended in 1842, the Seminoles that had survived were either moved to the Oklahoma, what we call Oklahoma, that Indian territory, or they had fled down in South Florida. But I wanted to point out this map and bring this map up to you to show you that there was a fort set up close to modern day O'Brien. You can see it down here. Right here, that fort. And according to E.K. Hamilton, E.K. Hamilton he did lots of different things, but during the mid-1900s, he was basically a historian locally. And he wrote about that fort, and at that point, he was able to access daily weather readings of temperature and rainfall that they had preserved by the Weather Bureau. I haven't seen it yet, but in the 1950s anyway, he had found some kind of documentation showing that fort recording temperatures and rainfall, which was kind of interesting. This map actually was commissioned, this part of the map anyway was commissioned in 1839 by General Zachary Taylor, who later would become president of the United States. And O'Brien today is pretty much close to where that double sinks is mentioned, between the fort and the double sinks, which that would be the Bellamy Road that goes through that. As you can see, it starts in Charles Ferry and goes down across the Natural Bridge, goes down to Noonsville, which is pretty much Gainesville today, and then we head on to St. Augustine. So that was pretty much the O'Brien area. There was not a community of people living, but there was a fort in the area. And like I've talked about before, these forts were not a fort that you think of today, not like what's in St. Augustine today, Castillo de San Marcos. These forts, if anything, were a log house with maybe some logs sharpened to basically make a fence on the outside to keep the Indians out. But not much to them. And when the war ended, they were scavenged for parts, or they just were converted to a house, no big deal. So we don't really have any remains of forts in Suwannee County today. So again, not much happening. In 1858, Suwannee County is established, created out of the western portion of Columbia County. The House of William Hines becomes the first county seat until a more permanent location can be found, and that permanent location for the first 10 years would become Houston. But O'Brien pretty much still had nothing there. Scattered houses, that kind of stuff, but people bought up large farms. There wasn't a lot there, community-wise. What you did have during this era is a place called New Boston, which I believe I've talked about before in one or two of the other presentations. But New Boston was founded in or before 1857 because they got their first post office in 1857, so we know it was there. And it was situated west on the Suwannee River, west of O'Brien, McAlpin, that area. You can see it up here. Right there. Going across to McIntosh Courthouse, which later came to be called New Troy. It was Lafayette County's county seat at the time. So, at that time it was a kind of big deal to have access there. There was a road going through there. as you can see on that Civil War era map. It was one of our bigger communities during the Civil War. Not the biggest, but there were enough people there. However, the post office closed in 1867, but it was still one of the 6 polling places in 1869 when the community, when Suwannee County citizens chose their county seat because the laws had changed. Instead of legislature decided this is where your county seat's going to go, the law changed and they said the people can pick where their county seat is going to be. And so New Boston was one of the polling places, along with Live Oak, Houston, Columbus, Welborn, and Plowdance. The first election they had to throw out because there were a lot of irregularities. Dead people were voting twice. People weren't sure what they were voting for because the description was very vague. So they basically threw out that first election, voted again a month or two later, and they picked Live Oak as the county seat over Houston. And they were pretty much, they'd gotten most of the results in New Boston they were still waiting on, but there were enough numbers there that Live Oak could be declared the county seat. And when they got Boston's votes in, it just added to Live Oak being the county seat because it was closer to them than Houston. But that's pretty much about the last thing I'm able to find in our records of really discussing New Boston in any details. It pretty much just faded away. Other communities grew up. When the railroads came through, that helped other communities rather than New Boston. McIntosh Courthouse, eventually New Troy, stopped being the county seat of Lafayette County. Pretty much there was just no need for that New Boston to continue there. So it pretty much died off in the ensuing decades. But in between that time, while New Boston still is around, you've got it being semi-close to the Old Bellamy Road, that trail that would go through, that road that would go through Suwannee County. So one of the things that happens during the Civil War era as it relates to O'Brien is on May 19th, 1865, the Confederate ambulance and a heavy wagon that was carrying some of the last records of the Confederacy. They had been traveling from up north, trying to get away from Union forces. Well, they came through, across the Suwannee River at Mosley's Ferry in that area, crossed over to the Suwannee County, and then stopped just north of what's now O'Brien. They stopped for the evening. There are about a dozen officers and men with it. And then they continued the next day further southward. And 3 days later, which was May 22nd, they got to Archer, Florida, when they learned that President Jefferson Davis, the Confederacy, had been captured. It's pretty much there's no need to keep on going. We're tired of doing this. So they pretty much disbanded there in Archer. But that last Confederate baggage train, if you will, having supposedly some gold and other things, we don't know for sure, but also some of the last records of the Confederacy came through Suwannee County, close to O'Brien, and then stopped. So we're now post-Civil War, and by the 1860s, 1870s, a major road is established going from Alligator, which becomes Lake City, over to Troy, which at the time was the county seat of Lafayette County, and it passed very close to what is now modern day O'Brien. So that brought more people traveling through that area around O'Brien. In doing research for O'Brien's inception, if you will, it's hard to find a lot of good records. But according to one of the old timers that lived there for all his life, there was a man by the name of Dabney. Don't know his first name, but a man by the name of Dabney who built a dance pavilion over a large sinkhole. And that pavilion came to be used by farmers and families, so basically they could gather and they could hang out. It was close to the road that came through at that point. And so Mr. Dabney built this pavilion. It started to be called, the hole anyway, it started to be called Dabb's Hole. It was a sinkhole. They shortened Dabney to Dabb's, so it became Dabb's Hole. And eventually a community grew up around it. So O'Brien's original name was Dabb's Hole. So by 1880, it was the community of Dabb's Hole. Now going through our deed records to see who owned property in Suwannee County, I have not been able to find that name, a Dabney name. So it could be a legend, could be somebody that rented property. It's hard to find sometimes those old records. But Dabney name does not pop up in the records that I've been able to find anyway so far. But that is the story according to a man that lived there. He was born like 1910, lived there all his life. So Dabbs Hole was around by the early 1880s, by 1880-ish. No, it was there by 1882 because this is an article from the Waynesboro, Georgia newspaper called the True Citizen, and it's referencing a Savannah article about an interesting find that was found there at Dabbs Hole. So I'm going to read it to you. It's hard, you can't see it there. I'm going to read it to you, and it's very interesting. I came across this a few years ago. I think somebody found it, and I got a copy of it. It's kind of cool. See if I can read it. I got it really small. It says, wonderful cave in Florida. A correspondent of the Savannah News, writing from Live Oak, Florida, under date of August 8th, so that would be August 8th, 1882, has the following to say in regard to a wonderful cave recently discovered in Suwannee County. Quote, a most wonderful discovery has just been made by Captain George E. Fahm and Major John T. Rumelot, which is no less than a remarkable cave located at Dabbs Hole, 22 miles south of here on the Live Oak and Rollins Bluff Railroad. For the following description, your correspondent is indebted to Mr. J. M. Hallows, the urbane and gentlemanly cashier of the Plant Investment Company. Also the kindness of Mr. S. L. Drain is in the employ of the same company. The mouth of the cave is a small opening at the earth's surface, widening as it descends and extends for some 40 feet upon an angle of 60 degrees before reaching the cave's level. The cave is a broad open chamber just after entering and extends in width until lost to view. The height of the part explored varies from 7 to 25 feet, and the scenery adapts itself to almost every imaginable shape and form, many of which are extremely picturesque and interesting. These gentlemen proceeded in a straight course for several hundred feet. When, wonderful to relate, they came upon the bank of a river and halted. The current of this river was rapid and its width considerable. They reported that fish seemed plentiful, judging from the agitation of the waters. Beyond the river were heard some dreadful noises, which, combined with the loneliness of the situation, made them feel very uncomfortable. They are both of the opinion that they saw upon the opposite bank a reptile of huge proportions, partaking of a serpentine form, and moving in all the horrid contortions peculiar to a serpent. The opinion is expressed that the celebrated sea serpent, which has been lost all the year, has just put in an appearance in one of Florida's submarine rivers. Just after seeing the serpent, they retreated to the open air, not wishing to risk themselves any further. So far as their sight could reach, the cave extended in all of its grim grandeur, and they are of the opinion that it may extend for some miles further. Many bones were found in the cave, and particularly on the bank of the river, all of which, with one exception, appeared to belong to animals. They also found a stone of cubical form, upon the top of which were traces of fire, the charcoal being covered with a green substance in the lapse of time. This may probably be an altar of the ancient fire worshippers. Traces also of fossil were plentiful. This cave was also visited by Judge George B. Baker, who verifies in every particular the statement made by the two gentlemen, and in addition had an experience which nearly turned his hair white, being butted in the rear by a goat which had been attracted into the mouth of the cave by the light. These gentlemen propose at an early date to make a thorough exploration of the cave, or they will show any other person the mouth of the cave and let them go ahead, which evidences that they are possessed of some personal discretion. By unanimous vote, the place has been named Fahm's Flue in honor of Captain George E. Fahm, one of the discoverers and a gentleman noted for his exploring propensity, he having descended several other considerable holes or depressions in this county. Your correspondent has not had the pleasure of visiting this newly discovered cave yet, but he intends to do so in an early day and will be pleased to furnish any particulars in regard to the same that may prove of interest to the public. So, that's all I found on it or seen on it, but that's a very interesting description of an underground cave system around O'Brien, basically in O'Brien's. I don't know if it was, I don't know. That's all I've heard about it, all I've ever read about it. So I don't know if it collapsed over the years or it was washed in or what, but that's pretty interesting. An underground river, those kinds of things, I don't know. I find it very interesting.
I think if it was still there, somebody that lives there digging in their yard, a garden, or something would come across them.
You would think so. But then we had earthquakes, a few earthquakes years later that were enough to rattle stuff and knock stuff. So I'm wondering if maybe that collapsed, or it was a sinkhole related and it collapsed, but or somebody plowed over it not knowing what the entrance was. I mean, I don't know. It could have been that double sink that was shown earlier. I don't know. Very interesting though, the fact that it was underground with the Underground River and with Indians, I'm assuming, that had been sacrificing there at some point or worshiping down there. So very interesting.
Yeah.
I found it interesting. But anyway, that was close to Dabb's Hole. Well, about the same time that's going on, and as that railroad is being, as that has been written, the Live Oak and Rollins Bluff Railroad has been chartered and is being constructed between Live Oak and Rollins Bluff, which is why it's called Live Oak and Rollins Bluff. Rollins Bluff is modern day Branford. So this railroad, which here is where it's incorporated, is going to help extend commerce into Suwannee County. Eventually it goes down to the Tampa area, but this is as far as it got in the 1880s. So you can see here John F. White, C.K. Dutton, H.M. Wood, H.S. Haynes, H.A. Wise, R.A. Ivy, Joseph H. Ruff, William Bryson Jr., W.L. Irvin, D.M. McAlpin, C.R. King, and William B. Taylor were the ones who incorporated it. Pretty much every one of those guys are well-known folks in Suwannee County. I mean, John F. White was a longtime judge. I've written articles on the guy. C.K. Dutton was a big naval arms, like turpentine, timber, that kind of stuff. Henry M. Wood ran become the Suwannee Democrat. H.S. Haynes was a railroad guy. Haynes Street in Live Oak is named after him. H.A. Wise, he ran timber, turpentine, all that kind of stuff. At one point he had half the convicts in the state of Florida working for him here. R.A. Ivy is Robert Ivy, who established Branford. Joseph Ruff, I'm not sure that guy. William Bryson Jr. was a bigwig in politics here and statewide. W.L. Irvin, that's Washington Irvin, who established Louisville, big into lots of different businesses. He was also, I believe, a county commissioner and a couple other elected posts. D.M. McAlpin, Daniel McAlpin, we talked about him last month, who not only ran the newspaper, but the town of McAlpin is named for him. C.R. King and William B. Taylor. These are all big wigs at this point in Suwannee County. So they have incorporated this railroad, and this railroad would go right by Dabb's Hole. The engines of that day were wood burning, so they had to lay out contracts along the railroad, for various stops so they could refill the fuel. One of those was at what would become O'Brien. And for many years it was run by a guy named J.W. Wells. So he had the contract for the wood for the railroad. So because of that, when that railroad comes through Dabb's Hole, they decide they want to change the name of their community. There's going to be a railroad station put there, and they don't want to put Dabb's Hole on there. So what they do is they want to honor one of the railroad officials who was putting in that railroad. So there's a person by the name of Kelly Reynolds, and they wrote in the book Henry Plant, Pioneer Empire Builder, and they said, quote, "The loyal and astute Michael J. O'Brien, Plant's business associate since 1863, left his name on the map of Florida modestly. When the Plant system completed the line through Lafayette," and they're wrong, it should be Suwannee County, "from Live Oak to Rollins Bluff, the citizens of the ingloriously titled midway village of Dabb's Hole decided to claim O'Brien as their namesake. When he arrived for the ceremony, however, Mr. O'Brien had need of all his Irish charm. The sign on the new depot that day proclaimed O'Brien, O-B-R-I-N-E, like brine, like salty brine, O'Brien. Rollins Bluff, the larger village to the south, subsequently honored Henry Plant and became New Branford, then Branford. From Plant's demise, Michael O'Brien served as president of the Southern Express Company until his own death in 1909. So basically the folks misspelled his name. So he shows up for the opening of the railroad depot and his name's misspelled. So I'm not sure how well that went over. But it stayed as O'Brien, B-R-I-N-E, for a little while. By this point, there were a couple churches, sawmills, turpentine steel, cotton gins, and 5 stores there in O'Brien. Then they changed it to O'Brien Station, and then eventually O'Brien Station. They got the spelling fixed a little bit, and a couple different ways. I've got several listed up there in the presentation how it was spelled, but eventually it came to be the way we understand it and what it should have been all along, O''B-R-I-E-N. This map is from 1888, and it shows it as O'Brien Station, and then underneath it says O'Brien Station, P.O. Post office was O-B-R-I-N-E. So even when it was called something different, the post office was technically something different. So yeah, misspellings. The plat map, which I think I'll show you in a couple minutes, I don't know if you can see the top of it, but even that was misspelled for the plat map, subdivision plat map for it. That gentleman I mentioned, Mr. Wells, who was born in 1910, he wrote like a 19-page book, if you will, of the history of O'Brien. So I've used his information for some of this presentation, but I've used the next couple pages are maps that he drew up in the back of it, showing where a lot of the old businesses were located, and then what was there at that point when he wrote in like 1999. So the T.J. Edwards sawmill was the sawmill that cut most of the timber for the original buildings, and it was located on the north side of town, west of the railroad, which is number 6, so up here. So this road, technically, this is north over here on the left. So the railroad tracks follow, or are parallel to US 129. So pretty much north is over here. So the sawmill was right there, number 6. That I've got circled is Dabb's Hole, so that's where the hole was. Probably not there anymore, probably been filled in over the years. But that is Dabb's Hole, number 9 there, close to Troy Street. So some of the places, let's see, some of the listings that Mr. Wells wrote about in 1999. Number 1, back then, early 1900s, was where the black school was. Number 2 was where New Bethel Missionary Baptist Church was. Number 3 was the Union Supply Company sawmill, which I'll talk about in just a minute. Number 4, which is down here, was the O'Brien High School, which was a 2-story brick building that I will talk about in a few minutes. And then number 5 was the old school, right across the street, was the old O'Brien School, which is a 3-room school, white school. Number 6, I've already mentioned, is Edwards. I'm trying to think some other ones. Number 11 was a sawmill. Let's see if it's on, it's probably on the other side. Different things. Lots of stores. That's 17, 18, 19, 20, all those are going to be different stores, like Edwards store, Millinery store, the Rickerson store, the Miller store, the Glen Hall store, J. Wells store. Lots of different stores. Let's see, some others on here. Just trying to see some of the numbers. 53 there towards the center right would be the old Methodist Church. It's now, as of 1999, was Grace Chapel. 57, probably on the other side. Never mind, I'll talk about that in just a second. So lots of different things. Here's the other side. This is east of the railroad tracks. So I've got a couple places circled. Number 45 is where the S&S is today, so that gives you kind of a bearing of where it is. And number 28 was the original railroad depot. That was the original depot. So that gives you a few other stores on the other side of the railroad tracks, on the other side of what's now US 129. So, lots of different community, lots of different homes and stores, turpentine mills, all those kinds of things. So a lot of good information that he wrote in that little book before he passed away. I'm assuming he's dead now, if he was born in 1910. Some of the settlers by this point, some of the settlers of what's now O'Brien were Barrows, the Edwards, the Faulkners, the Fletchers, the Hoovers, the McCormicks, the McGinnises, the Scarboroughs, some Williams, Barnetts, Dunhams, and Millers. Those are some of the folks who lived in O'Brien after it was established. Now that E.K. Hamilton, his nickname was Ham Hamilton, but his nickname was that, and he would write in the newspaper. For many years he wrote something called A Slice of Ham. And basically it was a history article, if you will. And this is what he wrote about O'Brien. Don't know what date. It says O'Brien, now called O'Brien, was also settled in 1882 during the Second Indian War. And about 1840, there was an army fort located very close to the present town. Medical personnel, along with their other duties, took daily weather readings of temperature and rainfall. These records were preserved by the Weather Bureau and formed the basis for this location. By 1885, the community boasted a population of 150. The business interests were centered in 2 sawmills, a grist mill, cotton gin, turpentine steel, and school. There were 2 churches, a Methodist and Baptist, to serve the community. Only one preacher is shown, Reverend Fleming of the Methodist Church. And then he just goes into a whole list of different folks. I've already mentioned a lot of their names. Boarding houses, shoemakers, the postmaster, general merchandise, blacksmith. You've got a couple of, he said, in the farm listing we find 2 strange occupations. L.B. Levis, banana grower, J.B. Barrow and J.L. McCormick as pineapple growers. So that's interesting. Then several orange growers, and that would have been before 1890s. We had several freezes, 1896 or 1897, and that destroyed all the oranges up here. But we had several folks in Suwannee County that grew them. So there's just around O'Brien, there were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There were 11 gentlemen who raised oranges on farms around O'Brien. A lot of grain growers, that kind of stuff. So lots of stuff going on in O'Brien in the 1880s, 1890s, that era. Thriving community, in other words. So see, here is the plat map of O'Brien, as I mentioned earlier at the top. How's it spelled? O-B-R-I-A-N. They just kept messing up the spelling of it. Grandiose plans, like a lot of communities I've mentioned in the past. They had all these ideas for all these lots, blocks, and lots, and hoped people would fill all of them up. But like a lot of places, it's just listed by name only. There's, it would remain woods or farmland and stuff, not much to it. Dabb's Hole I've got circled as a frame of reference. And this way, north is pointing up on the map. So Dabb's Hole there is circled, block 2, lot 4. I've already mentioned some of the different places, but you've got sawmills, groceries, bottling plants, post office, lots of general merchandise stores. The Union Supply Company, which I mentioned earlier, basically was formed by a group of O'Brien citizens in 1910, early 1910s. So they combined their resources and they built a sawmill on the north side of town, and then a store they built in 1916 on the east side of the railroad. And they, like a lot of other company stores, they would not pay them in cash or in gold or whatever else. They would pay in tickets, if you will, different things, coinage that could only be used at the company store. So you pretty much had to use their store if you worked there. A lot of companies did that throughout the United States at that point. So that was what was going on. O'Brien was thriving. Cars were now showing up. So some folks were moving away, but O'Brien still had a lot of businesses. But then in 1917, the night of April 6th, April 7th, they have a fire that starts in the 2-story residence of Mrs. Byrne. It was high winds that day, that night, and because of that, they went even across the street. The flames carried across the street, 129 today, and they burned down a block of wooden stores. A lot of the stores, pretty much most of the stores in O'Brien burned up that evening. Now Branford, which was the closest community with fire, sent folks up to help, but they were hindered because the first building to catch on fire in O'Brien had the telephone exchange. So it was too late by the time they showed up, and were not able to save anything. According to the newspaper, the losses were $25,000 at the time, most of which was not insured. And the fire would have been even worse, except there was a brick store of Mr. A.S. Wells, and it stopped there because it was brick. It could not keep on going. So, even though a lot of the buildings burned down, the community decided we're going to rebuild. And by the time the newspaper published a couple days later an article about it, they were already starting to clear off the properties to rebuild, this time with brick. They learned their lesson. It's basically the same day, ironically enough, that the United States declared war on Germany in World War I. Two things are not related. It wasn't like, oh, the Germans burned it and we're going to declare war. It's just, it has to be the same day, so it's kind of interesting. So for a long time with O'Brien, cotton was the main agricultural product in that area, not just around O'Brien, but Suwannee County. That's the cash crop that made the most money. But then about the time this fire is going on, you've got the boll weevil coming into Suwannee County, and that ruins that crop. So all the cotton gins pretty much closed down, or most of them, and farmers are looking for something else to sell. So one of the things that takes up the slack, for a few years anyway, is watermelons. Watermelons. So by 1922, 1923, O'Brien is kind of the watermelon capital of Suwannee County. And in that year, they had something like 325 train carloads of watermelons shipped just from O'Brien. And according to Mr. Wells, that was half of the entire Florida crop of watermelons, just out of O'Brien. So that was a lot. That was a lot going on. This picture is from 1910, so before that, and it's showing the Dowling Park area, Lancaster specifically, showing Mr. Sid Heinley and his family shipping out some watermelons on LOP&G, Live Oak Prairie and Gulf Railroad. So watermelons becomes that new crash crop for a few years, and then tobacco comes in by the mid-1920s, and that is the cash crop for all of Suwannee County for several decades until they realize not so good for your health. So then that goes away. But like I said, O'Brien rebuilt from their fires with a lot more durable buildings. This is a map of Suwannee County in the 1920s, 1926 specifically. But I've got at the office, I've got a phone directory from 1925 and 26, which is pretty fun to look at. But it talks about O'Brien, and this is how it's described. It says population 200, located on the ACL Railway, which is Atlantic Coastline Railway, in Suwannee County, 18 miles south of Live Oak, the judicial seat, 5 miles from Branford, the banking town, and 100 from Jacksonville. Has a hotel, a public school, Baptist and Methodist Episcopal churches, sawmill, cotton gin, and turpentine steel, Telegraph Western Union, and a telephone connection. And then they give a whole page of businesses. So let's see some of them. There's the postmaster still. They've got a notary public. There's a garage, mason and contractor, barber, blacksmith, several general stores, the hotel, a meat store. They've got Dr. Reynolds as the physician and druggist, and that Union Supply Company that I mentioned already. Still one cotton grower. T.J. Webb was growing cotton in that area. Lots of general stores. So O'Brien was still a happening community. But unfortunately, by the mid-1900s, people are leaving, people are fleeing, cotton's no longer big. You can drive a lot better because the roads are a whole lot better than they used to be. So people start moving away. So by the late 1900s, there's not near as many people there. You've still got schools in the mid-1900s, and I mentioned a couple of them. This is the two-story brick high school built in 1929. And it replaced that earlier three-room wooden one I mentioned about a few minutes ago. This one was north of, I believe it was Troy Street, I think we were looking at, or Duval Street. And that becomes the white public high school in O'Brien. And that goes for several years, but then as the 1940s go along, World War II ends, people are moving and readjusting where they want to live. The school board is consolidating their schools. So in 1951, they start busing the kids from this school, the white kids, are going either to Branford, mainly Branford. Some of them may be going to Live Oak, but pretty much all of them are going to Branford. And this becomes the African American school, which replaces their older wooden building, which was northeast of this, on the outskirts of town. And this school operates as the O'Brien Black School for about 20 years. So we've got a couple pictures. This is the 1964 O'Brien boys basketball team in front of that school. There's some Clarks, Philpotts, Lintons, Polites, Jacksons, Jenkins, a lot of names that are still around here, Allens. And this is the 1964 girls basketball team. So again, a lot of names that are still around today. And it lasts as such until basically segregation ends and they decide they don't need the school anymore, so it's sold off to a private individual, torn down, and there's now a house, private residence there on the property. So they've lost their schools by the 1970s. Schools are gone and they go to Branford. This is a couple pictures, a montage, if you will, of a couple of pictures of O'Brien, showing downtown, if you will, up top, some of the old buildings that are still there. 226th Street is there on the bottom left, which goes out of O'Brien. You got O'Brien Baptist Church on the right center, and then the O'Brien Feed Depot and Hardware Store there on the bottom right. So, still a few stores there in O'Brien. It's still a community. There's no mayor or anything like that. I'm not sure there ever did have one, to be honest. But it's still a community with several stores, and that's good, because a lot of the places I've talked about over the years in Suwannee County, they're gone. Today, it's a very rural community. In Live Oak and Branford, agriculture is the main business. Lots of natural beauties. Little River Springs is that picture there, and it's not too far away. So several springs are close to O'Brien. But it's a very quiet community, not much to it. Still has a post office. Still has a post office. But that kind of ends our part of the series where we're talking about communities. So next month, next year, we started talking about a variety of topics, just kind of hodgepodge of stuff. Next month will be the clock tower at the courthouse. I created a presentation for a clock tower group over in Tallahassee a few years ago. They wanted me to come over and talk about it. So it's like, well, if they wanted to hear it, maybe somebody here will want to hear it too. So there we go. So thank y'all. Any questions, thoughts, comments?
You